First, thank you all for joining today's meeting. My name is Jennifer Fawcett. I'm the current president of the North Carolina Prescribed Fire Council, and we are very excited to be able to host this for everybody today. Whether you are a member of our council or not, we'll provide a little bit more information about the council here in a moment, but we are hosting this in conjunction with the Consortium of Appalachian Fire Managers and Scientists today. This is actually a field trip that was originally planned back in August as part of our annual meeting that we ended up holding virtually. It was originally scheduled to take place in person, but then with the Delta variant, we ended up having to make a last minute pivot to a virtual situation. And we are also providing this field trip to you now virtually as well. So we will be watching this video together today. We are also recording this session. So if you have to leave early or you miss some of it, we actually have a YouTube link to the presentation itself, to the video. But for today's session with the panelists, we're going to be recording this and posting it on our North Carolina Prescribed Fire Council website afterwards. So for those of you who are not members of our fire council, I just wanted to share some information with you on how to become a member and to invite you to become a member of our fire council. If you registered for the annual meeting last August, then you are already a member. So we actually offered membership to everybody who registered for the meeting at that time. If you're not sure if you're a member or if you'd like to become a member, there's actually some information here. And actually, I don't think I'm sharing my slides. So let me go ahead and make sure I'm sharing this for you to see the slide on how to become a member. We have a website. And if you go to the website and you just click on membership and you click on join online, there's some information there about how to join. It's only $15 a year to become a member, or you could actually become a lifetime Spark member so that you never have to pay the membership fee ever again. So there's also a student option for those of you who might be students and you want a reduced rate. So we have lots of options. And as you can see on this slide too, there's lots of benefits to becoming a member. We are an open group and would love to have anybody join, whether you work for an agency, you're a landowner, you're a student. If you have any sort of interest in prescribed fire in North Carolina, we welcome you to join our membership. So one of the perks of being a member is activities like this. We have this field trip today. We have our annual meeting every year, which we'll talk about at the end of our presentation today. So lots of opportunities for you to become involved and learn more about fire in North Carolina. So we invite you all to become a member of our fire council today. We also invite you to join our social media. So I included both Twitter and Facebook for those of you who are on social media for both CAFMS and our fire council. So if you're on social media and you want to follow some of the activities of our group, I invite you to do that as well. I'm not sure how many of you here are actually living in North Carolina or specifically Western North Carolina, but for those of you who do live in Western North Carolina and are interested, there is a group that actually just started in that part of the state that is a prescribed burn association primarily for landowners to come together and help each other burn on their properties, to learn together, to train together, to burn together. So if anybody's interested in more information about that, we'll put a link to a Google form in the chat box, which if you fill out that form, it essentially adds you to our email list. And so you'll get email information anytime there's an upcoming burn on somebody's property, or if you just want to learn more about that prescribed burn association. So there's also several prescribed burn associations in the eastern part of North Carolina for those of you that live in the eastern part of the state. This one in Western North Carolina is newer and is kind of in the general vicinity of what you'll actually be seeing in our video today. So just a few housekeeping things before I turn it over to Jen Bunty. Just for those of you, please mute yourselves. Please turn your cameras off while the video is playing. If you have any issues with Zoom, we have Bob Barden, our tech support help today. You can chat him directly and let him know if you're having issues. If there's any bandwidth issues, you can actually watch it on YouTube. We have a YouTube link we'll put into the chat, and then you can kind of reconnect with us back here in about 20 minutes. The video is about 20 minutes long. So here's our agenda for today. Western North Carolina field trip video. So like I mentioned, these are the sites that we would have seen in person had we been able to meet in August. But Jen Bunty would graciously put this together. We had our panelists who are joining us here today. We all went out in person, and she was able to capture some of this on video for you since we couldn't do it in person. So then we'll actually meet with our panelists, and all of you on the line today, you will have a chance to ask them any questions that you have. So as you're watching the video, feel free to think about what questions you have. And at the end, we'll actually open it up for discussion. You can turn on your video, you can unmute yourself, you can put it into the chat box, whatever way you want to ask your questions to the panelists. And Jen Bunty's going to lead us through a discussion with our panelists for all of the questions that you might have. And then finally, we'll just wrap it up with some information and updates for our meeting this year, our annual meeting happening later this year. And we'll hear those from our Vice President, soon to be President, Laurel Case. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jen Bunty, and she's going to now lead us through our video. So you can sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. I hope you all are ready to hear from a lot of Jens today. There's a few of us that put this together. But I'm Jen Bunty. I'm with the Consortium of Appalachian Fire Managers and Scientists. And I produced this video with the help of our panel. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right. Sit back and enjoy. We'll talk after. Is this one of the ones you were slated to burn this year?
We burned it, yeah. So this is burned twice. So that was the break between the two units.
Fire management in Western North Carolina has some unique challenges. There's a lot of diverse topography, which is the foundation for ecological diversity, different ecozones, as we call them, that occur on relatively small geographic scales. And we have more acres of wildland-urban interface than any other state in the country. Southern Appalachian forests have a strong fire history and a strong history of burning, both from Native Americans and Europeans up to the early 20th century, when, like so many places, we began an era of fire suppression, which threw our entire natural fire regime out of whack. Over the last 20 or so years, we've been working to get more good fire on the ground, whether it's managed wildfire or controlled burning. But restoring our fire-adapted ecosystems is really a story about the partnerships and the networks that have made the work on the ground possible. It's a story about relationships. I traveled up to Lake James State Park, about an hour outside of Asheville, North Carolina, to visit some of these burn sites and hear some of the collaborators who are working to manage this landscape. Can you stand sort of uphill here?
So today we're at the Long Arm Peninsula, where Linville Gorge dumps out into Lake James. And this is an area that we've burned 2 times now, first in 2015 or 2016 and 2021. So 2 fires, 5 years apart. So kind of the goals of the burn were to reduce hazardous fuels. This was a project funded by the U.S. Forest Service on the Community Protection Program.
Peninsula itself, it has a centerline ridge top that fades down to the lake, which was once valleys and river bottoms before the lake was created. It's a man-made lake. And so these ridge tops would have been dry and much more fire adapted and saw frequent fire. And after hundreds of years of humans on the landscape, we really altered that fire regime and even the tree species composition on the landscape. So like Thomas said, we have poplars and red maples on tops of these ridges that are really the mesophytic, wet, cooler trees that should be down in those coves. And so we're trying to shift these drier sites back to what they would have been, and also to make them more resilient for when wildfire moves through this landscape on its own. It's able to withstand the fire and not be so severe and intense that it's destructive to the landscape, but also to our park neighbors and landowners.
And so some of our target species that we're trying to top kill, we've got maple here. We haven't totally killed it, but we've injured it. So this tree, it's a thin bark species. Multiple fires will kill it eventually. Let's see what other species we've got here.
A young hickory here, which again is also like the oaks, more fire resilient, fire adapted. And so this is the younger one. It got a little bit of fire damage, but because it's fire adapted, it just shrugs it off and is sprouting again, and it's going to bounce back.
So it's good for us to have a mixed severity fire effects. We don't want to blast everything out the first time around or the second time around. So we're mixing fire effects, using ground ignitions. We use flares and other methods out here too. So.
And this unit's actually, this whole peninsula is fun. Like you mentioned, the flares, it's actually, we get to get on the boat and shoot flares into the unit from the lake, which is not typical.
we initiate aqua squad.
Right.
So. It's an aqua squad of one.
No, it's we got aqua squad of 2. So we have 2 boats, multiple igniters on both boats. So we'll use multiple ignition techniques. We'll use flares. We'll actually pull the boat up on shore, do ground ignitions as well. So we'll actually bump around the whole area. And even when we have a helicopter in for aerial ignition, we have to have a backup plan. So we implement the boats and the flares. An interesting fact about this burn was the first time we actually burned this unit, Linville Gorge actually had a wildfire in it. And so, the U.S. Forest Service was managing the wildfire for ecological benefits. And we had a burn window open up. So the community, they're getting all the notifications about a wildfire in the forest. And, so the North Carolina Forest Service State Parks were like, well, we got good burn conditions, and kind of reached out to the U.S. Forest Service. How would you all feel if we did a prescribed fire next to your wildfire? And, going back and forth, the National Foresters, we like what we're seeing. We think it's a good idea. So we had a wildfire and a prescribed fire going on right next to each other. And, and it was a success story.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the difference that we saw when we were driving into the site about the fire effects, the intensity between aerial ignition and hand ignition or ground ignition? Yeah,
absolutely. And so coming in, you can tell with the aerial ignition that we have a more open setting as opposed to where we've done aerial ignition and ground ignitions on the site. Yeah, so it's kind of hard and it's a shock to the system. You crack open the canopy, but what we've got is we've got oaks and then we've got some scattered pines, and these pines are actually the ones we actually want to keep. So we got pitch pine, shortleaf, Table Mountain pine, and then we've got a bunch of dead Virginia pine, white pine in here, which this is our goal. It's hard to see this. You got the standing dead, but this is actually heading in the right direction and where we want it to go.
The other super cool thing that's easy to miss in this is how much you've changed the fuel structure. Like, it looks like there's still a lot of fuel out here, but what you're seeing is big bowls of trees. You're not seeing the same density of small stems, of smaller pieces of wood. So what you've got is large pieces of wood, and then you've got really fine fuels with the herbaceous and the grasses, And those are exactly the kind of things that are going to be receptive to fire, that are going to change the way that you operate in the event of a wildfire. This is
Yeah, the fires are burning under less extreme conditions now. So, with the closed canopy, you would have to burn under some pretty sketchy conditions. Now we can actually reintroduce fire following up with more moderate conditions because we have that lighter, flashier fuel structure than the heavier, denser fuels.
This theme of controlled burn units and areas that have been affected by wildfire being right next to each other or sometimes being part of the same property is something we see throughout this region. We headed up to another burn unit in the afternoon that crosses the boundary between the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission and the Pisgah National Forest to hear a little bit more about how these partners burn together and the effects they're seeing on the ground.
So you're joining us here on the Lake James prescribed burn unit. This is in McDowell County on the Grandfather District. So Lake James is it's just south of 2,000 acres. It's about 1,950 acres. 200 of those are Wildlife Resource Commission land. It's been implemented, been burned 3 times. The first time was in 2011, and then again in 2015, and then just recently this past spring in 2021.
This is an area on the state-owned game land, state-owned Pisgah section that we harvested in 2010. It's about 40 acres that we cut, specifically selecting for pitch pine and shortleaf pine here. So it's really unique topography. There's some steep ridges and drainages and also some rolling hills. We're right here on the edge of this Blue Ridge Escarpment. And so we got we have table mountain pine, pitch pine, and shortleaf pine within this burn unit across that elevational gradient. Here within this timber sale area, we've mainly selected for pitch pine, and although there are a good bit of shortleaf out here too. And so the objective of this sale was to remove most of the overstory, which consisted primarily of white pine, and was an off-site species. We came in and removed about 75 to 80% of the overstory, selecting for pitch pine and oak and hickory species, and shortleaf pine as well. And so from a wildlife perspective, really have seen a huge response in the amount of wildlife. We saw a lot of red-headed woodpeckers, which are very uncommon here in the mountains, show up after we started after the timber harvest and first couple prescribed burns. We've got a lot of early successional bird species that use this area, and from a game perspective, we've seen huge increases in the amount of deer and turkey in this area as well. So it gets hunted a good bit, but we're really proud of this area.
The burn fell under a categorical exclusion that was it was signed for wildlife habitat improvement and or timber stand improvement whenever it was established. And I think the only caveats to that, it couldn't be treated with herbicides and not more than a mile of temporary roads to be established within the burn unit. And so that's why it made sense to do a joint burn with Wildlife Resource Commission. There are some pre-established roads in here, but to simply cut it off, at a forest boundary or Wildlife Resource Commission boundary, you would essentially have a straight line over all this topography. And so, just really doesn't make sense from a management perspective. To try and establish new lines, just use those existing roads that go across those jurisdictional boundaries. Table mountain pine, pine oak heath, it likes fire, it wants to burn, and so this has been a great, opportunity to get fire back, where it needs to be on the landscape. I know when this was being planned out, there was some eco-zone math that was done, and it focused on areas, that were fire prone already, and then also in close proximity to wildland urban interface. And so on the ridge behind us over here, there are some communities and cabins and whatnot. And so this is adjacent to some private property here right around Lake James.
So there's two real big points that I want to make here. Is we're standing in the southern escarpment. So just as it sounds, this entire escarpment is south facing. Those two ridges have the highest propensity of positive lightning strikes of anywhere in North Carolina. So the reoccurrence of natural ignitions in this area are by far much higher than anywhere else that you're going to see in the southern Appalachians. This particular burn on the Lake James burn has not only greatly improved wildlife habitat. I mean, we've got beautiful ecological recovery here. We've got phenomenal game habitat and bird habitat. But it's also drastically reduced the fuels. So in 2015, we had a natural ignition on Bald Mountain, and having this fire as well as the Dobson Knob fire further up the hill really helped us to be able to open the door of what different management tactics we could take, of really understanding what risk was out there and knowing where we could drive that fire and where we needed to control the fire and where we could kind of head the fire into a different direction. So this particular burn is with the Wildlife Resources Commission has a huge emphasis on habitat, but it also is surrounded by WUI. It's also surrounded by residents, and it's been put to work. It's been demonstrated that these types of prescribed burns can meaningfully reduce the cost and the risk of wildfire.
Along with the government organizations and agencies that make all this fire management possible, we also have several RC&Ds, Resource Conservation and Development Programs, that are active in this area. I called up a colleague, Jen Haas, with Mountain Valley's RC&D. Hey, Jen. To share her perspective on what we're doing to help the local human communities become fire adapted.
We mainly focus on fire adapted communities, getting communities to identify their risk and then take action to mitigate their risk. And we recently kind of developed a cost share program. And so we learned that wildfire education alone is not as effective, but providing an incentive for them to get work done, a 40% reimbursement, and next year it will go up to 50% reimbursement. That kind of helps them get that work done, because a lot of that work, is cleaning out your gutters, which you need to do anyways. It has a lot, and some of the branches touch the roofs. Like, you need to do that for maintenance anyways, but kind of sharing with them the wildfire preparedness spin on it, and other actions they can take to be prepared if a wildfire is nearby. One of the biggest challenges that we run into is convincing people to prepare for wildfire. Fire is a part of the landscape and it's not going away. And so communities have to learn to adapt to live with fire, and we have to be comfortable with fire on the landscape. And so I think it's convincing them and making sure that they're comfortable with fire on the land, and teaching them that fire can be a tool that we can use for land management.
As I was talking with Jen, she used the same words to describe the partnerships that she has with the folks on the National Forest and on the game lands, and that word was seamless. And I work in this area, so I see these partnerships day in and day out. I work to build them, but it was really something interesting that everyone kept using that term, and it made me want to dive more into the story about how these partnerships were built and how they function.
So how did it start?
The partnership has really been driving up in the last couple of years across the board. I think, in my opinion, it's driven a lot by the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. It started out with things like the Fire Learning Network. You've got research being shared, you've got practices being shared. This was kind of captured into Prescribed Fire Council. When it got formalized, you get a lot more interaction. These are the driving forces, towards a lot of this cooperation that's been really seen in the last 2 to 3 years. Nature Conservancy getting on board with a lot of burns. And the benefits of prescribed fire for wildlife, silviculture, and hazard reduction burns, they've been known for a long time. So DOD has been taking care of military installations. North Carolina Forest Service has been helping out landowners. Wildlife has been doing game lands. Parks has been coming on here in recent years, doing more burning than they used to. But it's that collaboration and crossing lines that we're starting to see more of. cross-boundary burns, multi-jurisdiction folks coming over to help other people hit burn windows. It's been really, really good to see. And I think a lot of that's been driven by not only that sharing of information, but kind of that shared footprint. From a funding standpoint, the Stevens Act, within 10-mile buffer of U.S. Forest Service boundary. Some of that money comes downhill from the U.S. Forest Service. I'm on the mitigation staff for the state of North Carolina, and so our job is to manage that money when it comes in, and whether it's the North Carolina Forest Service doing burning, or in recent times Parks is jumping in there doing some CPP burning. I manage that, so when the burn occurs, all the invoicing comes up to me, and I kind of manage the nuts and bolts of it, verifying that everything was done how it should have been, where it should have been, who should have been doing it, kind of documenting all the process that goes on.
I'll just add one of the most exciting things for me of working in fire in Western North Carolina is the fact that we've got all of our state agencies, all of our NGOs working together on nearly every burn that we have. So I can't think of a burn on the Grandfather Ranger District in the 8 years that I've been here where we haven't had either TNC, Wildlife Resources Commission, North Carolina Forest Service out there helping to implement, not just to be able to help their neighboring agencies to meet those wildlife objectives or those fuels mitigation or ecological objectives, but also because that's their jurisdiction. So these burns are being planned across those property lines, and it's good and it's exciting that all of us are coordinated. We're all relying on those same resources. When we do have smoke in the air and when we have either a wildfire or a prescribed fire, everybody gets a call, and you get that call from those residents or constituents that is whoever they're most familiar with talking to. That's who they call. And it's really reassuring that we're all getting the same responses. We're all talking about the same needs to have fuels reduction, to have this ecological benefit, and it's just incredibly valuable for all of us to be talking from the same sheet of music. And everybody's operating under this assumption of rising waters will lift all ships. Mm-hmm. So the TNC support that we're hearing of, a lot of that funding came directly from the grandfather CFLR, and so starting up that on-call burn crew that can help out on private lands, that can help out on state lands, that can help out on federal lands, and being able to shift those resources all over the place to wherever the priority is for that day is a huge flexibility.
Yeah, a lot of our burns in Western North Carolina, they take upwards of 50 plus people, and so it's all hands on deck. We can't do it alone. No agency can really do it by themselves, and so having an on-call crew, state, federal, cooperative partnerships really is how we get it done. One of the neatest things about this area, and a lot happened that wasn't so good, but one of the best things that happened here is this is the birthplace of forestry in the United States, and so I think that's something that we should all be proud of.
Think about that history, about how these partnerships have been built, and also the history of land management in the Southern Appalachians. I couldn't help but think about how in the past, before fire suppression, neighbors burnt this land together. And now we're really just still doing the same thing. We're reinstituting that culture in a new way to manage this fire-adapted landscape the best we can. All right. Nothing like hearing your own voice. Let me tell you, it never gets old. If I could have the panelists turn your cameras on, and we will move into our little Q&A discussion portion. Feel free to put questions into the chat, or raise your hand and we'll call on you. But before we get into the question and answer portion, I guess we should go through a round of intros. So I'm going to ask you panelists to give your name, title, and agency, and maybe if you have a quick snippet of something about this collaborative network, maybe how it got started or something that you considered a turning point that strikes you. If you could share something like that, you know, we all love a good story. And so I will go first. I'm Jen Bunty. Like I said, I work with the Consortium of Appalachian Fire Managers and Scientists. And I think for me, a real turning point was actually, it was something that I've been able to reflect on in the past. When I first went to an FLN meeting and I saw people actually pulling out maps with Sharpies and circling their burn units and talking about their plans for the future and how they could put those plans together. And I thought, and everyone kept talking about what a big deal that was. And I was brand new to fire and brand new to this job. And I was just like, I don't, like, of course, why don't you know when your neighbors are burning? And now knowing so much more and about resource capacity and just how hard it is to actually communicate those things. I look back on that and think about what a special moment that is and how vital it is to just get out the maps and Sharpies and talk about where you're going to burn. And in order to make plans for the future. So Thomas, if you want to go next.
Yeah, I'm Thomas Crade. I'm the North Carolina State Parks Fire Management Officer. And so I cover the whole entire state. But I guess for me, my background prior to working for the state, I worked for an ecosystem support team in Florida. And we pretty much provided support to anyone that needed it. And so I've adopted that throughout my career is if you need help, you know, we're going to provide you assistance. Just let us know what you need. And so I've always tried to maintain that customer support and partnership support.
That's awesome. And I know all of your partners appreciate it. Sharon, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey guys, I'm Sharon Bischoff. I'm the Mountain Region Biologist with North Carolina State Parks, and so I cover the western third of North Carolina with state park properties. And I think for me, the turning point kind of really cementing our collaboration and partnerships for me was a few years ago, pre-pandemic time, when we were all allowed to gather in large mass gatherings. We had at Lake James State Park, actually, we hosted a Learn and Burn festival, which was kind of new to at least this area. And we, the park hosted it, but we had all of the partners you saw in the video and more. Everybody showed up, and we all showed up in our logo shirts and uniforms and that sort of thing, and did our formal talks and got to know the audience and our neighbors and private landowners. And then we did a demo burn after lunch, and everybody changed and put on their Nomex, and we all looked exactly the same. And I had multiple participants after the fact come up and say, oh my gosh, you all say the same thing, and you all looked the same once you got on the fire line. I'm like, yep, that's how we do this. And so that really kind of, I was like, oh, this is kind of important and folks need to know about it. So.
Yeah, that's powerful representation. Nick, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, good afternoon, folks. I'm Nick Larson. I'm the district ranger on the Grandfather Ranger District. That's the Pisgah National Forest south of the Blue Ridge Parkway, from about the Black Mountains on over to Lenore. So we administer about 200,000 acres of national forest lands. One of the exciting things that we've got is the Grandfather has had a collaborative forest landscape restoration project for the past 10 years that has really strived to increase our burning and increase our coordination with our neighboring entities and agencies and partners. So it's really given us a lot of support to be able to enable a lot of these partnerships and really put them to action and have them work both on U.S. Forest Service land, as well as, like Sharon was talking about, we had a couple of our employees out with the Learn and Burns and all the other opportunities to be able to reduce fuels and restore some good fire.
Yeah. Jen, and then Jamie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Haas. I'm a wildfire preparedness coordinator for Mountain Valley's RC&D. We're a nonprofit organization in Western North Carolina. We serve 8 counties here, including McDowell area, where these burns took place. And I just think it's really special that traditionally A lot of agencies work in silos, but more and more as the years go by, especially these partners are working with each other, not just with other agencies, but also with nonprofits and working more to get the word out to residents. So I think it's super exciting, and I'm really excited to see where all this goes. More collaboration. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamie Tyson. I'm the Fire Management Officer for the Grandfather Ranger District here on the Pisgah National Forest. I'm relatively new to the area. Majority of my experience is out west. And so coming to the Southeast, I think, one of the things that really opened my eyes to the partnerships, was actually the second day of implementation on the Lake James burn that we talked about there. We had enough resources poised and ready to move forward with 2 burns. And so, Thomas mentioned in the video the amount of resources that it takes to pull off 1 burn. Well, when the bell rang that day, we had enough resources show up so that we had folks poised to burn the remainder of Lake James, as well as another large unit that we had on the Forest Roses Mountain. And so anyway, for me coming in, it was just outstanding to see how many folks showed up, on the day of the burn when that bell rang to support and get the good work done on the land. So.
Did we lose Jen Bunty?
We did.
Okay, well, I am happy to, and I think you were the last one to introduce yourself, correct? All of our panelists have now gone. So I think I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. There is for the participants, there is a button down at the bottom, a reactions button. You can either raise your hand, or you can just go ahead and turn your video on and mute yourself. You can put it into the chat box. There's lots of different ways that you are able to ask questions right now. But as people are kind of thinking about everything that they've just heard and processing the video and all of the different collaborations, one of the things that I've heard talked about a few times now and came up on the video too is the importance of private lands burning and those learn and burn events that you all were mentioning, where people can become involved and they can see a fire. So could you share from your perspective how some of your partnerships and the work that you're doing and how private lands and private landowners are a part of that? Whoever wants to start, I'm not going to specifically call on somebody but you can just kind of take turns answering it if you have something you'd like to say.
I'll speak from the state park perspective. So from the state park perspective, our mission is conservation, recreation, and education. And so a big part of what we do, we do land management, but we also have to educate the public in what we're doing. And so I really take to heart the education side of what we're doing. And so inviting people out to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, is a critical part of that. And so landowners have the opportunity to see what fire actually looks like on something besides their own property. So they're not guessing, but they can also see what it looks like, pick our brain at these learn and burn events, figuring out what conditions, how do I get what I want out of this property. So we serve as a demonstration ground for the neighboring communities and an education ground for them.
I can add a little bit to that too. So a lot of the prescribed burning that we do, the main objective is to reduce wildfire risk to communities, right? And I think we're certainly making good progress on reducing that risk for ignitions that start in the national forest or any threats coming off the national forest. But at the end of the day, still the vast majority of our ignitions come from private lands, and the values at risk are those private properties, right? So I think about an example when we worked on the Crawley Branch project just this year. As we were prepping that, Jamie and some of his staff ran into some of the landowners, and just in a simple conversation, the landowner offered up and he said, "Hey, why don't you bring this fire line down to my driveway? That way you don't have to construct this fire line." You know, and his thought was, well, this will be less work on those folks. But at the end of the day, the fact that we were able to reduce fuels right there in these two folks' backyard, that much closer to their residents, that much closer to their structures. I mean, that's exactly where the values are and where the risk lies. So the opportunity to bring those things down and to make good logical decisions on how much work and how much disturbance we're doing and where our actual values at risk are. That's what a lot of this is about. So the more that we can meaningfully engage those residents, those folks that are responsible for the values that we're working to protect, the better.
Any of our other panelists want to chime in before we go to our next question? Okay, I had one coming through the chat that was beyond the Stevens money. How do you see the infrastructure funds increasing your collective impacts? And I know there's still a lot of unknowns with that funding at the moment. So I don't know if you are going to be able to fully answer that, but if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I can share a little bit.
Okay.
So I mean, how much it's going to impact and directly how it's going to impact, I don't think we really know just yet. But at a higher level, what's happening is we've got clear support for not only reducing the risk on federal lands, but there's really high expectations on being able to improve conditions and reduce fuel on private lands. And I'm sorry, I don't remember those numbers off the top of my head of kind of what that national target is of how much U.S. Forest Service land and National Park Service land versus how much private land is kind of framed up to try to get treated. But especially here in the East, there's I would expect a good amount of focus to be on private lands and not just how we can protect the residents and the communities, but their investments. You know, a lot of our timberlands, some of them, you know, for the maintenance of those conditions need prescribed fire, some of them to reduce a risk of catastrophic fire. It's a good opportunity to get folks on board. So we're starting to pre-position and think about, you know, how we work a little closer with our state agencies and how we can be prepared for that. Because as many of y'all know, both federal and state natural resource agencies have been slim for a long time. So any kind of optimism is really, really good for us. And I think North Carolina, especially Western North Carolina, is in a really good spot to be able to run with that support.
Yeah, I can speak from the state perspective on where we're at. So it doesn't really relate to the infrastructure bill, but so our fire program with state parks actually originated through NRCS, USDA. And so the state realized through those federal funds that this was a worthy investment. And so once the grant ran up, the state overtook the funds. And so now at this point in our agency, we're actually looking for appropriations at this time. So the state has been taking over the prescribed fire funds for us. So that's including, you know, the expansion of our program.
And I would add to Thomas's point for the side of the support and funding has also really come from groups like CAFMS and the Prescribed Fire Council and the FLN Landscapes. Those kind of NGO organizations and groups, they're able to speak to legislators, to the communities, and the governor and things like that, whereas government employees, that's maybe not our purview or our place. And they're able to bring that awareness of prescribed fire and wildfire risk and fuel mitigation, those topics that generally don't float to the top of the priority list when you're trying to solve so many other issues. So groups like that have really kind of elevated what we're trying to do, and that's really helped open doors, whereas before it just wasn't the priority.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And actually, I failed to mention during the intro, but for those of you not in North Carolina, you might be interested to know that actually last February, which was yesterday, we actually got a proclamation from our Governor Cooper, proclaimed February to be Prescribed Fire Awareness Month in North Carolina. So that was very exciting for us. And I was hoping today's event, if there were only 29 days in February this year, we would have been able to celebrate in February, but one day later. So we do have another question in the chat box here that I wanted to get to, which is more about the ecology side of it. And it was, what time of year do you think is most important time of year to conduct a prescribed burn? And then second question, do your ground fuels burn year round? And then a side note, teamwork makes the dream work, which I really like. So a couple questions here. Essentially, when is the best time of burn in Western North Carolina? I don't know if Jamie or Nick or Thomas, you want to take a first stab at that?
Yeah, and I can take a stab at it. So fall. So as the leaves come off, the canopy opens, sunlight penetrates, and we get our lower RHs and more receptive fire. And then also from a mortality standpoint, we don't get as much mortality. And so really, I guess, when to burn would be your desired effect. There are growing season burns that are conducted that time of year in the spring and early summer. You've got sap rising up into the trees. And so you shock those trees a little bit more and you tend to get a higher mortality. So really the objective of the burn and kind of what you're trying, what your desired effect is will dictate, when it is more optimal to burn. But typically for us, it's dormant season. So anytime from leaf off in the late fall, through spring, whenever the new sprouts and leaves are beginning to come on.
Yeah, and I can add to that. So North Carolina has kind of a two-tiered fire season. We have a fall fire season and a spring fire season. So that's when most of the fuels in Western North Carolina are most available. But another important factor for us is smoke dispersion. So we have to time the burns around when the smoke's actually going to disperse really well. The problem we have with smoke dispersion in the fall is that we have a lot of cold air coming in the fall, so it pushes the smoke down into the communities. So it's not ideal for us to smoke out our neighbors. So we're looking at different effects with smoke. In the springtime, you have warmer air coming in, so warm air wants to rise, or smoke wants to rise with it too. So we see that we get better smoke dispersion in the springtime too. So that really helps our decision making too. So we have the effects side that we're focused on, but we're also concerned with smoke. We don't want people breathing heavy volumes of smoke, and the Prescribed Fire Act really limits us from being able to send unlimited amounts of smoke. So we don't want to cause an exceedance with air quality.
Great, thank you all. And yeah, North Carolina has such a diverse landscape, so it is kind of different in different parts of the state. So thank you for asking that question. We have, I think, one more question in the chat. Let me just make sure. And actually 2 more questions in the chat, and then I think we'll go back to one more. So the other question that I have here is for Jen Haas. How do you, as someone working with communities on preparedness, connect with the managers on the ground doing prescribed fire? And how interested are those communities in what's happening in terms of land management?
So as I mentioned in the video, a lot of my work is around education and educating landowners the importance of fire, along with the importance of preparing for a wildfire. And so I work a lot with these partners to kind of know what's going on as far as what prescribed burn activities are going on in the state and in this area, and also research coming out and just how they're working together so that I can translate that to communities of, you know, these are going on, these projects are going on to take care of fuels in this area or look at the ecological benefits. So I try to just share a bunch of information about fire so that people are more aware of the benefits of that. I want them to understand. I feel like a lot of landowners are afraid of fire, maybe because they just don't understand it. And so working with the partners and getting their feedback and just from the literature, trying to share that with landowners so that they're more comfortable with it, seeing smoke in the air, or if there's a prescribed burn going on next door, that they feel safe. So that's kind of how I connect with partners with this topic.
Great, thanks. Do any of the partners want to chime in on that question too? Okay, we do have one more question in the chat, and then I'll get over to Jen Bunty. And this question is, what are some steps that can be taken by forestry professionals to better guide their clients from planning to implementation around fire? It's kind of a, I guess if you were to give an elevator pitch, because I know there's a lot that goes into all of that. I guess, but I think the part of that question, and Lang, if you're on and you want to unmute yourself and speak, feel free to do that as well. But it sounds like for forestry professionals specifically who have clients, maybe consultants or yeah,
sure.
Go ahead.
I would just add that so much of the need for prescribed fire happens through all of our clients' planning. And it's one thing to write it in a plan. It's another thing to help engage them in a way that makes them get excited about wanting to have prescribed fire on in their forest, on their property. And I just didn't know if there are pointers or tips when you're talking about fire with your clients that can help encourage them to take whatever that first or second step is that might move them closer to actually doing it.
Yeah, so I'll speak to the Prescribed Burn Association methodology. So I think this is really the niche that Prescribed Burn Associations really fill, is that it's an environment where landowners can come together, that they can see fire, work on fire, understand fire, talk about all those things that they like, they don't like. And it's really what we're doing with the fire learning networks and the consortium Appalachian Fire Management Scientists. We're all talking about what do we like, what do we not like, what works, what doesn't work. And from a private landowner standpoint, that's exactly what the Prescribed Burn Associations are doing, that they're getting together, they're eating dinner together, burning together. So it really adds to those conversations of what do you like, what do you not like, how can we get these results that are really desirable for our properties. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense. So and if I can jump in here too, I was at a Learn and Burn recently, and I was pretty impressed with how many landowners wanted science to back up their decisions. They were really, really interested in this. I thought I was just there to attend and take pictures, and then people kept coming to me with science questions. And so just from a communications perspective, if you can back it up with some research, and if you need access to that research, contact your local friendly fire science consortium. And we'll be happy to help you translate that or pull some research articles. That, and also just the fire history of the area. If you can have a couple facts in your pocket about the fire history of the area, I think people really
really respond to that, especially people who really care about their land and care about the natural resources in this area. They want to see it returned and supported to its sort of natural status in a really healthy place.
I'll add another plug line for Learn and Burns, or just an opportunity to see some areas that have been burned. Because in the times that we've had work with private landowners or with the general public, where folks are able to stand in a chunk of woods that has been burned, and they can literally see firsthand the changes in the ecological process, that helps. That gets that gets people thinking about why is this happening, and how can how can I see this improvement of game habitat, or an increase in understory diversity, or even just fuels reduction and having a more open, inviting forest, or whatever those objectives might be. Giving folks the opportunity to actually see some of that and see it put to work, and see it in a landscape that looks a lot like their backyard, or whatever that piece of property is that they own. Like Lake James is an awesome example. You can just drive through Lake James. Like that would be a phenomenal place if you're looking at a spot to have a low impact show a private landowner what some of those accomplishments might be. Just a simple drive through the pavement of Lake James, and you can see a good step-by-step, and you can start to picture that trajectory of the forest as it changes with reintroduction of fire. But getting folks to see that stuff is huge. Like getting them to actually stand in the woods and observe it and see what's happening can really open a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thanks for all of your responses. I think having people actually be able to see those things and to relate it to their own property and know that it is possible is really important. And our Fire Council supports that. All of the groups that you heard about support that. There's all sorts of partnerships that help to implement those things. So yeah, and we're always open to, as a Fire Council, to help create those events where they're not taking place yet, or to help partner on those types of events. So if anybody is in an area where you need some assistance with that, like from a fire management side or from a fire science side, Jen Bunty mentioned CAFMS is available to provide some research, but we are happy to help support and in any way to increase the use of prescribed fire in North Carolina. So with that, we're out of time for any more questions. If anybody does have any more questions, go ahead and put them into the chat in our last few minutes here, and maybe our panelists can answer them in the chat box. I did just want to thank Jen for creating this film and for all of her help with the session today. And thank you to Bob for our tech, and to all of our panelists for not only being a part of the video, but also for being available to answer all of the questions that came up today. We had some great questions from the audience. Again, this was recorded. We will post it to our Prescribed Fire Council website. And I just wanted to reiterate one more time that, our council is meant to bring people together, natural resource professionals, public and private land managers, anybody who supports the use of prescribed fire, into one cohesive organization in North Carolina. So we heard a lot today about the importance of collaboration among agencies, but also kind of that private lands piece of the puzzle. So as it's been mentioned, it's really going to be an all hands on deck approach to getting the amount of burning done in North Carolina that needs to be done, including Western North Carolina. So we thank you all for joining today. I am going to pass it now to Laurel Kays to give us a little bit of information and a sneak peek about one of our future events taking place later this year, which is going to be our annual meeting. So Laurel.
Yeah, and super quick, we're just in the opening processes of planning this year's annual meeting. The past couple years have been virtual due to COVID, so we're really looking forward to, hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, actually getting to see other human beings this year. We are planning for it to be in the Sandhills. We were looking back over the past 10 plus years of the council, and we've never done a meeting there, so we're going to go ahead and do that this year. We don't have a specific location, but we're looking at a couple of options, and it's probably going to be in the first couple weeks of August as we've typically done it. That said, like I said, we're in the very early stages of planning this. So if you have any thoughts on meeting location, times, dates, field trips, things you would really like to hear covered, anything like that, please get in touch. I'll put my email in the chat box. And yeah, feel free to get in touch to let me know any thoughts you may have. If you're interested in helping to plan the meeting, we're always happy to help, or to have help rather. And we're also exploring the idea of trying to make it sort of a hybrid, have a virtual option for folks like Western North Carolina people who may or may not be able to actually travel. So if that's something that you really would like to see, again, feel free to let us know that. And that's all I got, Jen. I don't know if you want to close it out any further.
No, just thank you again to all of our panelists and to everybody who joined today. And we thank you for being a participant in today's field trip. And we hope that you'll be able to join the in-person field trip that Laurel just talked about later this year, and to stay connected with CAFMS and the Fire Council throughout the year. So thank you all so much for joining, and have a great rest of your afternoons.